Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me on the show for the very first time from the Detroit News is Nolan Bianchi, who I see everywhere. I see it at the Combine. Of course, the Vikings play at least 2 games against the Detroit Lions. We thought last year it might be 3, Nolan, but it didn't happen. I am very happy to have you on the show. And I want to talk about this little cute thing called regression and whether the Detroit Lions are going to be able to fight it off. But how about just tell me about the vibe right now of the Detroit Lions? You lose a couple coordinators, but add DJ Reed to the mix, mostly the same team that you have covered there for the last 2 years. Does this team feel like they are still very much the team to chase down in the NFC North?
I think so. I mean, going into the offseason and just what transpired with the 2 coordinators leaving, and you mentioned some of the personnel coming in and out. Really, the only significant loss that wasn't addressed was the loss of Kevin Zeitler. And, they kind of, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves with a 6th-round rookie who played 2 starts last year and was really, really good. But I think even the optimism there was kind of, making the Zeitler departure a little bit, not sting too bad. And then Frank Ragnow left, and it feels like everything kind of hit the fan because that dude, I mean, behind Jir Goff and Aiden Hutchinson, I think is probably the 3rd most important player, maybe Penei Sewell, but the 3rd or 4th most important player to their success. And, I think they'll figure it out. They got a really good O-line coach in Hank Fraley, and a track record of being able to develop guys in the trenches. But yeah, I mean, I definitely was a shock to the system when you're sitting there on a Monday and all of a sudden that news, or whatever day it was, I can't remember. And the news just kind of seemingly comes out of nowhere. And so it's something they have to account for, and it's something they have to figure out. And, I think it could definitely cause them some issues, at least early on in the season. But I think at the end of the day, you have so much talent on that roster. You have Dan Campbell, and really that's all you need to feel a little bit hopeful about what's to come.
Yeah, the interesting part about Jared Goff. So this is the NFC North podcast that defends Jared Goff more than any, probably including in Detroit, just because of how well Jared Goff historically has played against the Minnesota Vikings. When he was a Ram, he had a perfect quarterback rating against Mike Zimmer's defense that finished in the top 5 that year. And then we've seen what he's done to the Vikings since Dan Campbell got there. And even when they were tanking, he found a way to beat the Vikings in Detroit on a last-second touchdown. So there is no Jared Goff disrespect here. But I have always felt like Goff, like many quarterbacks in the league, is delicate in that he can be pushed one way or the other, not physically, but one way or the other by the circumstances. And when you go back to the year where the Rams decided to move on from him, the notable thing was that their offensive line fell apart there. And I'm not thinking that Detroit's offensive line is falling apart, because you still do have one of the world's best offensive linemen in Penei Sewell, but you start going through the rest. And as you mentioned, you're talking about a 6th-round rookie. You're talking about another rookie that's going to have to probably start there, right? And Tate Ratledge. And is Decker still the same guy that he used to be? That's a thing for Jared Goff that I think impacts him more than other quarterbacks, because he's not mobile. He's not going to escape and run away. When he does, he kind of looks like a giraffe and then falls down. So I want your feeling on just how much Jared Goff's performance could be impacted if the offensive line is not what it's been these last few years.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think when you've seen them have poor performances, it is specifically because the pass rush from the other team is getting home. Like I just mentioned, there was a time in the offseason where you're like, okay, pretty much the exact same offense from last year, except everybody's a year older, which in the case of a young team is typically a good thing. And now all of a sudden, this position that's been their calling card for the last, call it 4 or 5 years. I mean, even before Dan Campbell got here, it was like kind of the one thing that okay, well, they have some talent here. But it's definitely, like you say, a precarious situation as they go into training camp here. And with a new coordinator too, I think is something that adds another layer to this. The one thing I will say is the offensive line coach is still there. So that's why I kind of have a little bit of faith that they're going to be able to figure it out in that regard. But you're right. I mean, three positions all right next to each other. The Vikings just revamped their entire interior, because it's not easy to get that right. And they have plenty of upside in the cupboard. So, I think that that's going to help this along. You have guys fighting for, you have, I don't want to say like guys who could start. You have like four guys who I think could start in those three positions, which I think is encouraging. At least in the sense of, they'll be able to put out a good product on the field. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. And, like we mentioned, Frank Ragnow was kind of the brains of that offense when it came to the pre-snap stuff. And I think that's something that Goff really excels at too. So I'm curious to see how he's able to kind of pick up the slack if it isn't a rookie in there playing center, if it is Graham Glasgow, the veteran. I think that might be the direction they lean at first, just because of the experience. But no, you're absolutely right. And there's a lot of moving pieces to this offseason in a way that really hasn't confronted this offense since they took off in 2022.
And the one that I'm sure that everyone is asking you about is the new offensive coordinator situation, which is weird to say Johnny Morton, since I grew up with wide receiver Johnny Morton, and I'm like, oh, wow, they hired Johnny Morton. That guy was up. Wait, who's this guy?
Yeah.
But when you think about the Ben Johnson running that, you could kind of maybe compare it to like an orchestra. And what do they call the guy who runs the orchestra? The conductor of the orchestra. And he seemed to be in perfect sync with Goff and with the offensive line and with the weapons and with the scheme. And every once in a while, some crazy, trick plays and things like that they got known for. But the way that they married the run and the pass, the running game was so dynamic. And I thought it was really unique and interesting. And then the way they played off of that, and it seemed like Goff really understood Ben Johnson and Ben Johnson really understood Jared Goff. What is that adjustment, do you think, going to be like? Because I saw this a ways back, the bad version of it, which was when Kevin Stefanski was not hired as the offensive coordinator. They went with John DeFilippo. Pat Shurmur left and went to be the head coach of the New York Giants very briefly for maybe 2 years. But for whatever reason, Pat Shurmur had gelled really well with those offensive players. And then when they brought in DeFilippo, they had mostly the same players and a better quarterback. And yet it just didn't fit in the same way. So what does Johnny Morton, not the receiver, have to do to make this work in the same way that Ben Johnson did?
Well, I think that's the $1 million question of this offseason, right? And I think when it comes to Ben Johnson, the thing that's going to be really hard to replicate is his ability to blend the science and the art of play calling. Like, I really do think that he was on another level when it came to just the play calling itself. And it was so tactical. It was surgical in a lot of ways. And so that's one thing I'm definitely curious to see how it translates. But I think all the other stuff in terms of getting the most out of Jared Goff and just being able to maximize the weapons there, I'm a little less concerned about that. One thing that Dan Campbell kind of alluded to when Ben Johnson was going through the interview process, he was like, if he leaves, we'll be just fine. Like, my specialty is offense. And he worked under Sean Payton for however many years. And people forget, Sean Payton at one time was Ben Johnson, the hottest up and coming OC who got a head gig. And, so I think that that's an interesting point, along with John Morton's experience working under Payton as well. So I think when you think about those two things, like they do have a foundation in those principles. And then you also look at the fact that when they built this offense in 2022, Campbell gave credit to John Morton for being there and helping design that offense. Now, how much he had to do with it, we'll probably never know. But I think one thing that they did was they built the offense around what Goff likes to do. They built the offense through Jared Goff's eyes, and I don't think that's going to change. And I think if you're looking for a reason for optimism that this team can kind of pick up where it left off, and it'll be hard to replicate. I don't think that should be the expectation, is for them to be, 13th in yards and points all time in a season, whatever. But I think as long as they continue to see the game through Goff's eyes, they're going to be okay. And he's still got the same quarterback coach, Mark Brunell. They brought up a bunch of offensive assistants on that were all former quarterbacks, Marcus Tuiasosopo, Bruce Gradkowski, just naming dudes here. But I think the way that they've kind of collected those brains together and the experience of saying, okay, we've done this before, and it wasn't necessarily because of a specific scheme. It was because we listened to what our quarterback likes and we go from there, and I think that's going to continue.
I covered Tuiasosopo's brother in AAA baseball. He was actually a really good football prospect too, and decided to go play baseball.
There we go.
May have spent some time with the Detroit Tigers.
He did.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I remember a home run that he hit. I think it was like a walk-off home run. Must have been like a decade ago. But yeah, I remember he was there for a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the tangled webs we weave. But going back on the offensive side, I think the biggest development from last year from the Detroit offense was that Jamel Williams is not bad at football. Surprisingly, when you get on the field and stay there and run around and do things rather than being suspended for gambling or whatever other problems he had, pretty good. And that right there last year, that emergence of his as a reliable weapon and a legitimate, serious, scary player for defenses, I think is what can push them through some of the potential regression. Like, I think it's there. I think it's a monster that's lurking behind every corner of, like, you get one offensive lineman hurt or something. If Penei Sewell is out for a couple weeks, what are you? And how can you survive? But with the playmaking ability with that guy with the football in his hands is really exceptional. And that's what they saw when they traded with the Minnesota Vikings, moving all the way up 20 spots to get him. How has that journey been? Because it feels like it's been a real roller coaster. And even last year, we know this, that Dallas Turner didn't get 15 sacks in his first year. So naturally, there's a lot of, is he a bust? Is he, should they fire the general manager and so forth? But I think that last year was really enormous for him to have that breakout to prove that he can actually be something. And they don't just have to put it all on Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, I think the roller coaster is a perfect way to describe it. I mean, he came in to the NFL with a torn ACL. He was rehabbing from that. So his rookie year, he pretty much just redshirted, and then
except for one
pass that he caught against the Minnesota Vikings. By the way, there's somebody in Detroit who clips all of was clipping all of the Paul Allen calls during the finale. And when he called Jir Gibbs the assassinator of all things Minnesota Vikings, I was like, I know he didn't mean it, but that was one of the coolest nicknames I've ever heard. Anyways, with Jamel Williams, it was like he just couldn't get on the same page. And when the offense was clicking as well as it was kind of like, well, you're going to have to jump on the train while it's going. And if you can't, sorry, we don't have time to wait for you. And I think this past year, they really put a lot of time into saying, okay, this guy is going to be an important featured piece for us this season. And I still do wonder if they could have gotten a little bit more out of him just in terms of his route tree and the stuff that they were asking him to do. I mean, you mentioned it, his explosiveness. For my money, like outside of Tyreek Hill, I don't know another guy who's one play away every time he touches the football quite like Jamel Williams. And I could see a world where if he does play the full season, if he doesn't have any, trouble, which on that front, he's kind of like the king of technicality. Like he just keeps getting caught up on like these little things. Like it's not illegal to gamble, but it is illegal to gamble in a hotel. It's not illegal to, and just like little things like that. But yeah, I'm expecting a really big year from him. It wouldn't surprise me if he just so happened to like finish ahead of Amon-Ra in yards or touchdowns or whatever, just because of what he's able to do every time he touches the football. And then, I mean, I don't know if you like fan bases outside of Detroit realize this, but he is maybe the most beloved player that I've covered in my 4 seasons here. And just in terms of like people love this guy because he reminds them of like a kid, and he loves football like a kid. And I think people relate to that in a world that's kind of being weighted down by a business side of things, and fans see that. But just a absolutely electric player, great personality, and I think this is the year, probably, we'll see, but where he brings it all together, and he really takes that next step.
And this is where, when we have talked about on this show about the potential regression of the Detroit Lions, I mean, everyone is going to fall back a little bit. 15 games, 14
Yeah.
games. Like, that's just not going to happen year after
Yeah.
year. The schedule is going to be a lot harder this year, but weapons sustain for me. If you have guys who can make plays with the football in their hands, even if you're dealing with other stuff, even if you're dealing with an offensive coordinator change and some issues on the O-line, I think in the playoffs, the O-line's really going to get you. But through an entire season where, you're going to have games against the Giants or against the Browns. But I think that those weapons are so hard to stop because there's so many of them with the Lions. And you talk about like guys who crush the Vikings. Detroit has like 5 of them. I thought when you said that nickname, you were going to be talking about Khalif Raymond. Like every time they face Khalif Raymond, this guy finds a way to do something. St. Brown has done something, but I want to dig deeper into Jahmyr Gibbs. Make it make sense for me of why this man is so unstoppable in a world where we just were reminded of, oh yeah, if you have a freak ass running back, like they can really, really be a problem. But we're always trying to pick apart like how much is X, Y, or Z. Like Derrick Henry does not have the season he has last year without Lamar Jackson taking up a lot of the defense's attention. Saquon Barkley does not have that season without the offensive line. Well, when I see Gibbs, I mean, I think, is it stupid to say like Barry Sanders? I mean, because I grew up, Barry Sanders, one of my favorite players of all time to watch. And as far as just being lightning quick, unstoppable, so hard to tackle, like he's up there for the toughest players to tackle that I think I have ever seen.
I agree. I think his lateral agility is probably the best of any running back in the NFL. And one quote that stood out to me is from former running backs coach Scotty Montgomery. He coaches the wide receivers now, but just asked about what made the tandem itself so special. He said, "I've never seen a running back that looks like Jahmyr Gibbs do the things that David Montgomery could do, and I've never seen a running back that looks like David Montgomery do the things that Jahmyr Gibbs can do." And in addition to the shiftiness, like just the ping, 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 like his contact balance and his ability, and that's where he reminds me of Barry, is his ability to keep his feet moving. Like if you are going to lazy tackle him, he is going to end up hurtling right over you in the midst of breaking that tackle, because he keeps his legs moving at all times. And then once he gets going in the open field, he's just absolutely gone. Yeah, no doubt. He benefits from a great offensive line. But to your point, I do think he's a player who, I don't want to say he's offensive line proof, but as much of that as you can be as a running back in the NFL.
It's funny because I remember I was doing a live stream on draft night when they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, and the entire internet was like, LOL Lions, you spent a pick on a running back. And I remember saying, yeah, I understand where you're getting at, but you're going to have to play him. And if he's good, it's going to be a problem. And boy, is it a problem to face Jahmyr Gibbs. The Vikings have not changed for the better in their run defense, but I also feel like the first level never is tackling Jahmyr Gibbs anyway. Yeah. So it's going to come down to whether the secondary can handle him. I just don't see a lot of answers for Jahmyr Gibbs. Like there's a lot of teams where if you do X, you could probably slow down this team's running game. And what Ben Johnson was really, really good at is, it kind of reminded me of Gary Kubiak in a way, is that he would keep going after it. And even if you use that pseudo playoff game from week 18 last year, the early part of that game, Gibbs wasn't dominating. He wasn't running over them, and they just would not go away from it. And that's what I'm curious about with the new offensive coordinator, is just, will you stick with it? Because with this guy, he's going to break it eventually if you get there, but that could be a hard thing to do for offensive coordinators. We certainly know that from watching KOC here, that sometimes it's like, even when it's working a little, if it's not working a lot, like, all right, I'm going to push the pass button. And I do think that that's a difficult thing to stick to when you're an offensive coordinator.
For sure. And I think that might be where the Dan Campbell influence comes in of like, hey, what are we doing? Why are we getting away from this? Like, keep going back to this. It's going to work eventually. And no, like you mentioned it, there were so many this season, especially after David Montgomery got hurt. You're kind of like sitting there, you're watching this production, you're like, oh my gosh, like what if he was just the only running back that they had, because his numbers were just so insane. He ends up finishing with 20 touchdowns. And, I think Montgomery had like 13 or something like that. So what he could do on his own is something that's fascinating. And I think that's something maybe to watch out for next year. I do think at the end of the day, it's like an organizational plan to keep this guy fresh and extend his career for as long as possible. So I don't know how much that changes, but to your point, with a new offensive coordinator, it could go the other way too, where you're like, hey, I know we're only trying to get this guy like 12 to 14 carries a game, but he's averaging eight yards per carry right now. Like, can we just keep spamming this? And yeah, it's the number of weapons on that offense, I think is fascinating, and how they're able to spread it out, because I think that was something that Ben Johnson did a really good job of is everybody ate, like, it's like the joke about the everybody eats offense, or like the Packers have 5 wide receiver ones or whatever. Like, I think the Lions are kind of the exception in that case, where like they have all these guys and they do complement each other perfectly, and they do end up getting the most out of each other while still maximizing their individual production. So yeah, fascinated to see how Morton calls these games. Like I said, I think Ben was really kind of surgical in that aspect. So does he go away from Jahmyr Gibbs? But that was something that Ben Johnson took a lot of flack for at times, was in game. It was the Washington game specifically. I think he only had like 8 carries or something like that. And fans were like, what the heck? So yeah, definitely something to watch for. But I mean, I think he's going to be RB2, RB3 in the league next year in terms of production.
Well, the Packers offense was more like everybody snacks. If
Yes.
Detroit's is everybody eats, but in Green Bay, everybody just gets a little bit of food. There was a time where Montgomery went down against the Vikings last year, and I remember saying to whoever is around me in the press box, like, that's actually bad for the Vikings. Yeah. That Jahmyr Gibbs is going to get more carries. And I understand that process in the regular season when you're trying to make sure that a guy isn't carrying the ball 250, 300 times. But at some point, he is so good that you have to kind of sense, and this is what I want to talk about too. And I know that we could get to the defense a little bit, but I think that windows to win are really interesting to talk about in football, because it's so difficult to keep a team together, keep greatness together, and make it affordable. So Goff's got his new contract, and then here comes the flood of other deals, the St. Brown, the Sewell, and so forth. And it seems like they've been sort of handing out money left and right. I'm curious about how long this has to go. Like, what is the pressure level of the Detroit Lions? Because it's so funny how fast that this can change. And coming from Buffalo originally, where they missed the playoffs for, I think, 19 straight seasons. But now, if they don't win the Super Bowl next year, they are a gigantic failure and they might fire their coach. It's like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
And the same thing, you've kind of gone through the same thing. And I'm curious about that just from your coverage, even of seeing this thing rise. And I think the most exciting moment for fans is not when it's there, but when it's almost there. Like when you can see that it's going to be there, because the minute that it gets there and you fail on a 4th down and blow a lead to the San Francisco 49ers, then it's, wait a minute, you better win for us or you're a gigantic failure. It's a ruthless league. I'm just curious about how you view the rise and then the timeline of like, how much longer do they have to get this done?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I do think there's a lot of people who feel like the window is already closed, and I think that's pretty silly. Like, my whole thing with them is, again, we talked about the talent that they have on that team, and at the end of the day, you can have the great coach, you can have the coordinators, but like, you have to have players. And from a personnel standpoint, they haven't really lost that many. Like I said, just Kevin Zeitler, Frank Ragnow. Frank Ragnow is going to be insanely difficult to replace, but maybe Zeitler's not. And you take all these pieces, and like I mentioned earlier, yeah, everybody's a year older, and that's kind of a good thing. Like in theory, these players should only be getting better. Panay Sewell, St. Brown, Jamel Williams, Aiden Hutchinson, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, Taron Arnold. Like the list goes on of players who are young, and I think it's an interesting point because I think last year losing to the Commanders was such a reality check, and not just in the sense that like, oh, you can still lose as a favorite or whatever, but like everything with this team was so linear under Campbell. They went from 3-13-1, 9-8, just missed the playoffs, 12-5, NFC Championship game, and it was just like, okay, so the next step is winning the Super Bowl, and then all of these injuries happen, and it decimates them. Like I truly like it was like around week 11 where I was like, oh, has it reached the critical mass? And then they lost like 3 more starters, and they still just kept trucking along. And I just think I kind of forgot where I was going with that point, but you just kind of it really drives home the point. Like, hey, just because you're a really good team does not mean you are owed the opportunity to win the Super Bowl. And I think that is the thing that's been hard to swallow for a lot of Lions fans this offseason, and what was so crushing about that loss to the Commanders in particular. So, to answer your question, to get back to the point, I do think this team has a few years left. Like they do still have guys under contract. The things don't really start getting all that hairy until like 2027. So maybe you got 2 more years to you really give a go at this thing, and then you kind of got to do a little bit of an organizational reset where maybe you're selling some parts or whatever. But their first big decision, I think, is coming very soon. You have all this money on the books. I think there's something like 50 million under or over the cap already for 2026, which can probably be figured out relatively easily with a couple restructures, but they haven't had to let go of anybody that they drafted and developed. And, could it be Jamel Williams? Could it be a guy like Alex Anzalone, who came and he was a veteran from the New Orleans Saints, but really was a part of that culture and a fan favorite and all these things. So I still think they have a few years to kind of have this window where they're should be considered one of the favorites, but the difficult decisions are coming.
Well, I think you make a really interesting point just about how everyone expects every single year to just be that next step, that there won't be a step back. And so far, they've kind of been right about that. Like, even when you don't get quite as far in the playoffs because of the loss to Washington, still more wins in the regular season. But now you've reached a point, and this is a weird place to be as well, because even with Kevin O'Connell here, where they've had 13 and 14 win seasons, but have not won in the playoffs, JJ McCarthy sort of washes this out a little bit, but still, it's like the season starts in January. And I feel like that kind of goes for Detroit, where the fans, of course, they're going to get excited every Sunday. They're going to come to the games and everything else. But when you win 15 games the year before and you go almost to the Super Bowl the year before that, like the season really ends up starting in January, which is such a cynical place to be
100%.
Football fans. But don't you feel like this has changed over our lifetimes, of where I don't ever remember as a little kid being like, boy, their window to win, they better get to the play. Like,
Yes.
I mean, those conversations are so interesting to us because they're high level front office type of stuff that fans have dove so deep into contracts and over the cap and draft and everything else that they really think through a front office lens of every team. But sometimes I think you are the Detroit Lions, guys.
Yes.
Like, you should be really pumped that your team is just even rolling out there and you don't have to put a bag on your head.
Yes. And it's very funny that you say that, because it is probably my number one pet peeve with sports fandom today, is that everybody thinks they're the general manager of their team. And if they don't approach their fandom with that kind of nuance, then they're a bad fan or they're stupid or something like that. Like there was a year, and one thing that used to drive me absolutely insane is these wars that would happen at the end of every Lions season when they're 4-11 and they're going into their last game, and then they just win it for no reason and fall 3 spots in the draft order, and everybody's mad, and they're mad at the fans who are happy, and they think those people are idiots and like they're smarter than the other fans because they realize that it actually would have been a good thing to lose, and they're refusing to let themselves be happy about their team winning a football game. I do wonder if like part of that is like we're just adults now, so when we were kids we weren't thinking about it like that, but it really does feel like the other things you mentioned, the over the cap, like you hear NBA fans talking, they're like, oh, this guy, he's not gonna be able to get here on a mid-level exception, idiot. And obviously I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it just like that's how the conversation sounds to me, and it's like, what are you talking about? And I remember one of my like defining thought, or prevailing thoughts from the NFC Championship game in 2023 is, I just remember I said on like our post game video, it'll never feel like this again. And just the rise and the, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening, just everywhere you go. Like it was just this no expectations. Honestly, I think they were still waiting for the other shoe to drop in those two games before the NFC Championship, and then it didn't happen. And it was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is all I've ever wanted. Everything else from here is gravy. The second you go to the NFC Championship, those thoughts are over. And I actually wrote a column after they beat the Titans 52-14 this year. And people were like mad because there were two drives where the Titans offense strung together some explosive plays. And this is, when you watch games, when your team stinks or when you cover a bad team, you're kind of looking for reasons for hope, reasons for optimism. And when you watch a contender, those thoughts start to get replaced by the fears of what won't be. And you just look at it through this like lens, like to your point, the season starts in January. Everything up until here is a test, and every wrong answer needs to be corrected. And that's just not how sports works. Like in 10 years, you're going to be like reminiscing about these days, like I do about like the 2012 Tigers. And you're going to be sitting there and then be like, oh yeah. And then they had this little punt returner, Khalif Raymond. He was amazing too. Like there's just so many people who mean so much to you right now. And that's like a cool thing that they're actually winning for you. Can you just enjoy it? Yeah, I don't know. Sports fandom is a weird thing. And I consider myself an idiot sports fan outside of every team that I don't, like of teams that I actually root for. I'm no better than the people in my replies every day. So I try to give those people some grace, but
No, I'm really relating to what you're talking about, because this show is a show that dives into overthecap.com, and I wrote a book on Pro Football Focus, and like this is what we do on the show. And
yeah.
I love that fans are so informed that we can have these discussions about, hey, this is how the Vikings are building through a competitive rebuild versus the Bears and Lions are tanking. And this is so interesting of how that's coming together, and how we evaluate players has changed enormously during my time in media, where fans are so much better at it than they used to be. I think if an offensive lineman allowed a notable sack in years past, it would have just been memorable and they would have said that player stunk. But now we're like, well, let's go look at the actual data that we have and all these things. And hey, we can really identify, and we can actually see ahead in the future to, this is when a player's contract really gets difficult, as opposed to being a 3-year contract, that kind of thing. And I think we're so much better at understanding what's going on because of that. And that goes for X's and O's, film analysis, everything else. But last year, I got frustrated because Sam Darnold was having one of the coolest seasons that I've ever seen. I mean, this was a guy who was nothing in the league but the biggest bust. That's the only way Sam Darnold was ever talked about. And he proved everybody wrong, had this crazy season, played great, led the team, handled the whole situation awesome, so many great moments. And then as soon as he lost, and actually it happened against Detroit, I think fans had given up already after the Detroit loss. It was like, all right, get rid of this guy. That was worth nothing. He's a bum. I don't care about this. On to McCarthy. I was like, that was a really fun season. And you never know how it's going to end. And in the middle of it, as he's having these 5 touchdown games against Atlanta, and like I think a lot of us knew they had enough weaknesses to where if they faced the wrong team in the playoffs, it was going to go like that. They were Darisaw, the interior had been taped together. Like you just knew. And I remember saying leading into the Rams game, like if they face the Rams, this is going to be a problem because that D-line is so nasty. No one thinks they would have won in Philadelphia the next week. Like we knew the team wasn't quite there yet, but yet in week 8, 9. It's like, well, get on to McCarthy. Like this season, it doesn't matter, and that kind of stuff. And that really frustrated me. Like, I think we can balance this
100%.
appreciation of a good team and the journey that is an NFL season, because I love like the first quarter of the season, and then you're getting the feeling of the team and they go through some stuff, or maybe they don't, like last year, and then are they going to sustain it? Like, I love that arc of a team throughout 17 games.
And the weather changes and it just becomes more and more hard nosed as the season goes on.
Right. And they have injuries or drama or whatever, all the sorts of things. Every single season is its own book. Right. And basketball, I think, was really the first to just be like, no, if you don't win a championship, you're a bum loser who should never even try. Yeah. And I think that started to leak very much into football. And it's something that I don't want to be here. And yet here you and I are covering two teams that if they don't win championships are bum losers, right? I mean, both of these teams. And that's what makes, I think, Minnesota and Detroit right now such an interesting rivalry, a true rivalry, is that both of these teams are going into this season saying, like, this should be us at the top of that division, if not for maybe them, which is a fascinating place to be. And those two games are really going to be something, including Christmas Day, Netflix. Hey, we'll welcome you in. I'll get a present for you guys when you come here on Christmas Day. Merry
I'm looking forward to it. No, but I think you raise a good point too. Like there is a room for balance, but I think it's gone so far in the one direction. And there's a great tweet that I love, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's from a guy from hockey Twitter, and he's like, the point of sports is not to win a championship. The point of sports is to be sad in a group. And at the end of the day, that's how your season is most likely going to end, unless you're one team. And you just have to appreciate. And I think that's the thing. It's like years down the road, Vikings fans will remember that past season, and Lions fans will remember that past season as just amazing, and they'll remember, they'll look at it through rose-colored glasses. They'll yearn for the chance to win 14 or 15 games again. And I just feel like in the moment, I wish people like did a little bit more. I don't want to call it reflection, but just like enjoyed the moment a little bit more. Like, dude, we're incredible, like we can't lose. It doesn't matter. We got Sam Darnold, throwing passes to Justin Jefferson that should never be completed, and he's just snatching them out of the air for a touchdown. Vikings win again. Like, I agree with you that like just the journey from the hot summer training camp to these cold, like desolate days where all you're thinking about is Sunday and what it's going to look like on the field against this team or that team. Like I truly love that. And, I understand why, fans do get caught up in the win now. Cause like I said, like, those really good Tigers teams from back in the day, I will forever like shake my fist at the fact that they didn't win a World Series, but I still love them. They still shaped, I think, who I am as a fan and my love for sports, because I got to experience those things. So enjoy yourselves, people.
I just think you can't lose that. You can't spend 17 weeks really angry and worried about what's going to happen in the playoffs. And I feel like Vikings fans, because they've been so close so many times, are really suffering from that, of the, like, just this could undo us. This is going to be the problem. This is going to be the thing that gets the number of questions I get already in minicamp about the kicker, because they're worried that he's going to miss a very important kick that costs them, is kind of amazing to me. And I think it's telling about the psychology, and it goes so differently between Detroit and Minnesota, but it sort of arrives at the same place. It's like, Detroit is so horrible for so long. Now that you're here, like, if we don't do it, we could go back to hell. And with the Vikings, it's, are you ever forever stuck in a different circle of hell, which is that you're always going to come just close enough and then not make it, which, each season for both franchises, a new hope, as maybe NFL Films would put it. And maybe that's for me what it really was, is just growing up watching those NFL films, the season recaps. They would be like, the Vikings lost in the playoffs, but they were warriors along. Like, the 18 best plays and games of the year. And you're like, this team was awesome. What are you guys They won 6 games, but the NFL films made it look like it was a great season or something like that. So I don't know. I feel like don't ever lose that, because also there's another point here to be made. Detroit knows what this is like. The Vikings really don't. Like, you could all be the Bears or the Jets, where every stinks and you're never good and you never have a quarterback and you're never in that conversation. It's just sort of imploring people to like appreciate where you've gotten to. Well, also, go to overthecap.com. Like, you don't have to feel bad about that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more thing, Nolan, before I let you go, because you're a Detroit guy. You've been there through the thickest and the thinnest, a lot of the thinnest. I want to know like the lowest and saddest moment that you covered, or maybe even before you were in media there, of Detroit Lions football. Like, what's the moment where you're just like, I don't even know what to do?
Man, there are a couple moments that come to mind. One of them is, I think it might have been 2019, and they played the Vikings, and it was like week 5 or something like that. So they start the season like 2-0-1 or something. They give up a 21-point lead in their season opener. And then they go to Green Bay for Monday Night Football at 2-0-1. And there's 2 hands to the face calls on Trey Flowers on the final drive that basically keep the Packers alive. They end up winning. It's like, oh my gosh, it's happening again. And I think one thing that's really interesting, and this is the stark difference between those Lions teams and these Lions teams, is they just instantly collapse. Like like Dan Campbell has never been a victim in his mind and his life. And I think that ultimately, if you could distill like the one trait that they needed from a head coach who was successful, it's that, because I just remember the very next week after that Packers game, it was like, how are they going to respond? Moment of adversity. What are Matt Patricia's men going to do? And I'm pretty sure they gave up like 500 yards to Kirk Cousins. And I think this was the same year. I cannot remember. But at halftime, or with seconds left in the half, Kirk Cousins threw a Hail Mary to Kyle Rudolph that was caught in the end zone. I can't remember if that was the same game, but it feels like it would be.
I want to say maybe that it was. I remember very specifically in that game that Adam Thielen caught a deep crosser and hurt his hamstring in that one. It was like an unbelievable throw to the back of the end zone where he comes all the way across the field, diving touchdown. And for whatever reason, Kirk Cousins, I did this one time where I looked at Kirk Cousins' stats as a Viking and then took out the games against Detroit. And I was like, oh my gosh, he had like 130 quarterback rating against just Detroit. Thank you, Matt Patricia. Matt Patricia, for a guy who came from Belichick, for some reason just played cover 1 against the Vikings the whole game. And every single play action was wide open. And that's like Kirk Cousins' best thing. And he would just feast and feast. I do remember this Hail Mary, because I feel like Rudolph just sort of reached up and grabbed it.
Yeah.
It was that game. Yeah.
And I just remember laughing, like it just like.
But then the next time they faced Detroit there have been very few times in my entire career covering this team where I was like, do I have to go? Like and the game against Detroit that year in US Bank Stadium where David Blau started, I was like, can I just stay home and maybe like watch the other games? Because Detroit with David Blau starting, this is not going to be good. But yeah, that's, I mean, not even close to the lowest of the low moments along the way. Like,
there have been some bad. So another one, I can rattle through some here. The 2020 Thanksgiving Day, the Matt Patricia's last game, they're playing the Houston Texans. It's COVID. Nobody's in the stadium. It's just depressing. And like, it's kind of like supposed to be like one of the best days of the year in the city and all that other stuff. And then Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans come into town and kick the absolute crap out of the Detroit Lions. And that was the game where Sheila Hamp was photographed in the press box with her hands in her face. But I just remember there must have been like 30 something seconds left. It was second down and Deshaun Watson takes a knee and the two teams start to come out to midfield. But for some reason, they were still doing like the stadium, like pump up noises and the guy just going, and the Hell's Bells starts playing as they are walking out to midfield, and the guy's like, Motown, it's third down. And I just remember I was cracking up internally because it was just like, what do you guys do? It's over. It's over. Don't you understand? This is all over. Go home. And yeah, that was another one. There's, I mean, so many Packers losses over the years that come to mind, especially like when I was a kid growing up, or even in more recent years. Like there were so many times that like they went to the finale against Green Bay with like a chance to win the division or like get in the playoffs, and like I just like completely memory hold for my life because they lost every single one of them. Yeah, a lot of bad moments. 0-16, obviously, I was like 12, so that definitely hurt. Yeah,
it's funny
that those are some of the bad ones.
When I got here, the Lions were actually good, and Jim Caldwell was like a pretty good coach. 2016, 2017, and they kind of always found a way to not get the job done. I think maybe one of those years they started out 7-2 and then just sort of faded down the stretch or whatever else. But they had really good teams, and then the Matt Patricia era was a throwback to all the other eras that you had before. And then Matthew Stafford goes and wins the Super Bowl, and everybody's got their own problems, I guess I would say, for Vikings fans. But Nolan Bianchi, you are a guy I always look forward to seeing every time you come to Minnesota. So we'll have Christmas dinner together.
Yes, please.
Boy, that for me, I don't really care that much about holidays and stuff like that, but I do of all the people that have families that are traveling and cover these games, and Roger's like, I don't care.
Yeah. And so I feel like I'm one of the fortunate ones. Like my wife is just super chill, and like I told her that I was like, bad news, and she's like, okay, we'll celebrate on the next day, and I'm like, okay, cool. And then both of our parents live like within driving distance to us, so like it's not like I feel bad for everybody who like has to go out of town to see their parents or visit with family or something like that. So I'm one of the lucky ones, but yeah, it is a giant wet blanket on the holiday season, especially with already doing Thanksgiving. But at least we'll get to see each other. I'll make sure I have the mustache. I've been dropping some LB so I can wear the mustache again. So
okay, looking good. Yeah, you've kind of got like a little bit more mustache.
Yeah, I got like a hybrid
still. Yeah, when I was hoping for it today, but this is June. Like we got to be ready when the time comes. But I think that game will determine the NFC North on Christmas. So
for sure, I can't. At the end of the day, I can't wait for it. Like it should be awesome. Like that's why we do this. That's why we like is to be in the building for these big games, and just it's so. At the end of the day, it's a little bit of a wet blanket, but I don't have kids, so like I'm honestly pretty excited.
Okay. Yeah. Well, anytime it's football. All right. Let's stop Midwest goodbye, Nolan. I'll see you later.
It sounds good.
Football.